Chapter 1, The Hero of the Hour. The first thing Ronald Weasley knew was white. A bleached, unending white that pressed down on his eyelids. The second thing was a smell, sharp, clean, and vaguely medicinal, like the potion his mum used to scrub the garden gnomes. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like leaden weights submerged in treacle. A groan escaped his lips, a dry, rasping sound that felt foreign in his own throat. "Ah, he's coming around." The voice was brisk but kind. Feminine. Ron forced his eyes open. The white resolved itself into the high, vaulted ceiling of the Hogwarts hospital wing. He'd been here before, hadn't he? The memory was a ghost, a faint outline with no substance. He turned his head, the motion sending a dull ache through his skull. Madame Pomfrey, the school medowitch, stood over him, her starched white apron immaculate. "Mr. Weasley. Good to have you back with us," she said, dabbing his forehead with a cool, damp cloth. "A nasty knock you took." "Very nasty indeed." "What?" His voice was a pathetic croak. "What happened?" Madame Pomfrey pursed her lips. "A great deal, I should think. You've been unconscious for nearly a full day. Best let Professor Lockhart explain the particulars. He's been waiting rather impatiently." The name meant nothing. Lockhart. It sounded like a type of key. Ron tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness forcing him back against the pillows. His mind was a cavern, vast and echoing. He knew his name, Ronald Bilious Weasley. He knew he was at a school for magic called Hogwarts. He knew the woman beside him was Madame Pomfrey. But beyond those bedrock facts, there was only a thick, grey fog. Where were his friends? Did he have friends? A face swam into his thoughts, a boy with unruly black hair and glasses, another with a cascade of bushy brown hair, but they vanished like smoke when he tried to grasp them. Before he could form another question, the doors to the hospital wing burst open with a theatrical flourish. A man strode in, radiating an aura of such blinding self-assurance that the very air seemed to part for him. He was dressed in robes of a breathtaking lilac, his golden hair coiffed into a perfect, wave-like sweep, and his teeth, when he smiled, were so brilliantly white they seemed to generate their own light. "He's awake." "Marvelous," the man boomed, his voice as smooth and rich as melted chocolate. He swept to Ron's bedside, a coterie of flustered-looking adults, Professor McGonagall, Professor Dumbledore, and a woman Ron vaguely recognized as his mother, trailing in his wake. "My boy. My plucky protégé." The lilac-robed man clapped a hand on Ron's shoulder. The scent of an expensive hair potion washed over him. "Gave us all quite a scare, you did." "A valiant effort, truly." Ron stared, utterly bewildered. I'm sorry, who are you?" The man's smile didn't falter, but it tightened fractionally at the edges. "Goodness. The memory charm must have splashed back a bit more than I thought. Perfectly understandable, given the circumstances. Gilderoy Lockhart, my dear boy. Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award." He punctuated the list with another dazzling grin. "But you can call me the man who saved Hogwarts." His mother, a short, plump woman with kind eyes filled with tears, rushed forward and enveloped him in a bone-crushing hug. "Oh, Ronnie! We were so worried. When your father and I heard, down in that horrible chamber." Now, Molly," Lockhart said, gently extricating her. "The boy needs his rest. Let's not overwhelm him." He turned his megawatt smile back to Ron. "I imagine you're frightfully confused. It's all a blank, is it? The last year or so?" Ron could only nod, his head swimming. The word chamber echoed in the emptiness of his mind, stirring a faint, cold dread. Lockhart pulled a chair to the bedside, positioning it so the afternoon light from the window caught his profile perfectly. "Then allow me to illuminate. It is, I must confess, a tale for the ages. A story of darkness, danger, and dazzling heroism." He leaned in conspiratorially. "My heroism, chiefly, though you played a vital supporting role." He began his story. It was a grand, sweeping epic that made the tales from the adventures of Martin Miggs, the Mad Muggle, sound like a shopping list. According to Lockhart, a monstrous beast, a basilisk, had been lurking in a hidden chamber of secrets beneath the school, petrifying students at will. The staff had been baffled, helpless. But he, Gilderoy Lockhart, had pieced together the clues. It all became clear to me, he explained, his hands gesturing dramatically. I knew I had to act. But I couldn't go alone. I needed a loyal, if somewhat green, assistant. I chose you, Ron. I saw a spark of potential in you. Ron listened, rapt. It sounded incredible. He, an assistant to this magnificent hero? We descended into the depths, you and I, Lockhart continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. And your dear sister, Ginny, was there, lying pale and lifeless, a pawn in a Dark Lord's game. It was a trap, of course. A terrible cave-in was triggered, meant to separate us. A flicker. A phantom sensation of grit in his teeth, the smell of damp earth. Ron frowned. A cave-in? Was I hurt then? A glancing blow from a stray bit of rubble, nothing more. Lockhart waved a dismissive hand. Knocked you clean out. A great pity, as you missed the main event. I, of course, was undeterred. I blasted my way through the rockfall with a stunningly powerful blasting curse, a variant of my own invention, you understand, and pressed on alone to face the beast. He paused for effect, his blue eyes wide in earnest. Imagine it, Ron. A serpent of colossal size, with scales like emerald armor and fangs dripping with a venom so deadly it can destroy even the most powerful of magical objects. It came at me, its great yellow eyes promising a swift and painful death. But it had not counted on the cunning of Gilderoy Lockhart. He described a breathtaking duel. He spoke of dodging, weaving, and casting a series of complex and brilliantly named spells, the azure blinding hex, the serpentine discombobulation charm. He claimed to have summoned the sword of Godric Gryffindor from the very air with a cry of pure courage, a feat of magic unheard of in centuries. I plunged the blade deep into the roof of the beast's mouth, he declared, miming a heroic thrust. It thrashed and fell, its reign of terror ended. Then, with the simplest of healing charms, I revived young Ginny and carried you both back to safety. The day was won. The room was silent, save for his mother's soft sobbing. Ron felt a profound sense of awe, mixed with a bitter tang of disappointment. He had been there, on the cusp of the greatest adventure in a generation, and he'd been knocked unconscious by a pebble. He was just a clumsy sidekick who'd missed the finale. It felt right, somehow. It fit the vague, hollow feeling of inadequacy that seemed to be the only thing left in his memory. Professor Dumbledore, who had been observing the scene with a placid expression over his half-moon spectacles, finally spoke. A truly remarkable tale, Gilderoy. One for the history books, I am sure. His eyes, a piercing blue, twinkled as they met Ron's. Memory is a curious thing, Mr. Weasley. It is not always the ink that is faded, but sometimes the page itself that is crumpled. It can, with time, be smoothed out again. Before Ron could puzzle over the headmaster's cryptic words, another figure pushed her way to his bedside. A girl with a storm cloud of bushy brown hair and fiercely intelligent eyes that were currently blazing with an emotion Ron couldn't quite place. It looked like fury. That's not what happened, she said, her voice tight and low. Lockhart chuckled, a condescending, fatherly sound. Ah, Miss Granger. Still overexcited from the ordeal, I see. Perfectly understandable. The shock can play tricks on the mind. It's not a trick, she hissed, her glare fixed on Lockhart. You tried to. Hermione, Dumbledore's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Weasley and Mr. Potter have suffered a significant magical trauma. Let us not add to their confusion. The name Potter sent another jolt through him. Harry Potter. The boy with the glasses. He was in the bed next to him, still fast asleep, a jagged scar visible on his forehead. So he was here, too. Had he also been knocked out by rubble? Lockhart hadn't mentioned him. Indeed, headmaster, Lockhart said smoothly, rising from his chair. Clarity is key. Which is why I have a proposition for young Ron, here. He turned his full, charming attention back to Ron. Your memory may be gone, my boy, but your bravery is a matter of public record. The Daily Prophet is already calling you Lockhart's Lionheart. You have a natural aptitude for assisting greatness. Therefore, I am officially offering you the position of my personal apprentice. We shall travel the world, you and I. Reenact my greatest triumphs for adoring crowds. You'll learn all my secrets to fame, fortune, and vanquishing foul beasts. What do you say? An apprentice to Gilderoy Lockhart. It was a dizzying prospect. A chance to be part of the story, even if he couldn't remember playing his part in it. It was a purpose, a direction in the fog of his mind. Yes, Ron stammered. Okay. Splendid. Lockhart clapped his hands together. We'll start tomorrow. First, a press conference on the front steps. Wear your best robes. With a final, dazzling smile and a nod to the professors, Lockhart swept out of the room, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The girl, Hermione, looked as though she was about to explode. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting from Ron to Dumbledore, a silent, frantic argument passing between them. The headmaster gave a minuscule shake of his head. Defeated, Hermione turned back to Ron. Her expression softened, the anger replaced by a deep, aching worry. Ron, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Just, be careful. Don't believe everything he says. His mother fussed over his blankets while Madame Pomfrey returned with a tray of potions. As the adults spoke in hushed tones, Ron's gaze drifted to the small pile of his belongings on the bedside table. A worn set of Gryffindor robes, a handful of chocolate frog cards, and a wand. He reached for it. It felt oddly light, wrong. The wood, as she vaguely recalled, was snapped almost in two, held together by a thick, clumsy wrapping of spellotape. It looked pathetic. Useless. This was his wand? The wand of a hero's assistant? Lockhart had said nothing about his wand being broken. He'd implied Ron had been a capable, if junior, partner right up until the rockfall. Why would a hero's plucky sidekick be using a wand that looked like it had been trampled by a hippogriff? He curled his fingers around the fractured wood. The world dissolved into a cacophony of sensation. A flash of brilliant, sickly green light erupting from the tip of his own wand. The deafening crack of a spell backfiring, louder than a thunderclap. The gut-wrenching roar of stone grinding against stone. The smell of ozone and wet dust filling his lungs, choking him. And a voice, his own, raw with panic, screaming a name Harry. Ron gasped, dropping the wand as if it had burned him. It clattered onto the floor. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, terrifying silence in his mind. The vision, or memory, or whatever it was, had vanished, leaving behind a cold sweat and the phantom taste of rock dust. He looked at the broken wand on the floor. Then at the sleeping form of Harry Potter in the next bed. And then towards the doors through which the world's newest, most magnificent hero had just departed. Lockhart's story had been seamless, polished, and perfect. But the flash of memory, that raw, terrifying splinter of truth, had been none of those things. It had been messy, and loud, and violent. And in it, Gilderoy Lockhart was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 2, Echoes in the Pipes. The novelty of being Gilderoy Lockhart's sidekick wore off with the speed of a bludger to the face. If the first week was a disorienting haze of congratulations and cloying praise, the second was a tedious slog through the mountain of collateral fame generated by the hero. Ron's days were now spent sorting Lockhart's fan mail into categories: adoring, slightly unhinged, and potentially cursed. He'd learned to identify the last category by the faint, acrid smell of desperation and cheap perfume. He sat now in an unused classroom Lockhart had commandeered as his personal administrative headquarters, a monument to peacocking vanity. A life-sized portrait of Lockhart, commissioned a mere 3 days after the chamber incident, hung on the wall. It winked and flashed its dazzling smile at anyone who entered. Ron found it nauseating. "Ronald, my boy, a bit more pep in your step." Lockhart's voice boomed from behind his desk, where he was practicing his signature on a stack of promotional photos. "Fame is a fickle beast. It must be constantly fed, preened, and paraded. You're not just sorting letters, you're curating my legacy." Ron grunted, slitting open an envelope with a violently purple wax seal. A small cloud of glittery dust erupted, smelling suspiciously of amortentia. He coughed, waving it away. Right. Legacy. His own legacy, as far as he could tell, was being the lad who'd fainted. According to Lockhart's ever-evolving tale, Ron had bravely stood guard over his unconscious sister while Lockhart and Harry Potter, another amnesiac, currently being doted on by a worried Madame Pomfrey, delved into the chamber's depths. Then, when a secondary basilisk, a new addition to the story as of yesterday, had burst from a side tunnel, Ron had valiantly thrown himself in front of Harry, taking the brunt of a memory-wiping curse the beast had apparently learned. It was a story so convoluted, so utterly ridiculous, that a small, insistent part of Ron's brain screamed that it was false. But what did he know? His mind was a book with the most important chapter ripped out. All he had was the word of a hero and the grateful, teary-eyed hugs from his family. His mom had practically suffocated him. His dad had clapped him on the shoulder, his eyes shining with a pride Ron felt he hadn't earned. Ginny, pale and quiet, just looked at him with a strange, searching expression he couldn't decipher. He tossed another letter onto the unhinged pile. It was from a witch in Transylvania who claimed to have birthed Lockhart's secret love child, a vampire with exceptionally good teeth. "Ah, I remember her." Lockhart mused without looking up. "Feisty thing. Lovely canines. Now, about the Order of Merlin, first-class ceremony. Do you think periwinkle blue robes are too ostentatious, or just ostentatious enough?" Before Ron could offer an opinion he didn't have, a low groan echoed through the stone floor, vibrating up through the legs of his chair. It was a deep, guttural sound, like the castle itself had indigestion. The enchanted lights in the classroom flickered, casting the winking portrait in a momentary, sinister gloom. Lockhart froze, quill hovering over a photo. What was that? Probably just Peeves, Ron muttered, though it hadn't sounded like the poltergeist's usual brand of mayhem. This felt older. Deeper. The groan came again, louder this time, accompanied by a faint hissing that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. A drip of dark, viscous liquid oozed from the corner of the ceiling, landing with a soft plop on a stack of parchment. The ink on the page sizzled and dissolved. "Right," Lockhart declared, leaping to his feet and puffing out his chest. His face was a shade paler than his lilac robes. A spot of bother with the plumbing, no doubt. The ancient infrastructure of this castle is a constant trial. Nothing a master of household charms can't handle. "Come, Ronald. A learning opportunity for you." He swept from the room with a theatrical flourish, Ron trailing reluctantly behind. The hissing grew louder as they entered the corridor. Students were poking their heads out of classrooms, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alarm. The sconces on the walls flickered erratically, and the air had grown cold, thick with the smell of wet stone and something else, something foul, like a long-forgotten secret rising from a tomb. They reached the great hall just as the panic began to bubble over. It was lunchtime, and the 4 long tables were packed with students. But no one was eating. Every eye was fixed on the enchanted ceiling, which normally mirrored the sky outside. Today, it was a maelstrom of angry, bruised purple clouds, though the real sky was a placid June blue. Then, it started. From the large water jugs on the tables, a black, oily substance began to seep into the pumpkin juice and water. It swirled like ink in water, turning the cheerful orange and clear liquids into a foul, bubbling sludge. A first-year Hufflepuff who had just taken a sip spat it out, gagging, as the liquid that hit the stone floor hissed and steamed. Screams erupted. Students scrambled back from the tables, overturning benches. Prefects were shouting for calm, but their voices were lost in the rising tide of fear. The black ooze began to overflow the goblets, slithering across the tables like thick, dark snakes. Fear not. Lockhart's voice, magically amplified, boomed through the hall. He strode to the center of the room, his wand held aloft like a conductor's baton. Every eye turned to him, a drowning crowd spotting a lifeboat. A simple case of residual alchemical contamination. A minor annoyance for one who has faced down the king of serpents. Ron stood by the doorway, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He didn't know much, but he knew this wasn't simple. The hissing was everywhere now, a whispering chorus that slithered at the edge of hearing. It felt familiar. Terribly, horribly familiar. From across the hall, he saw Hermione Granger. She wasn't panicking. She was watching Lockhart, her arms crossed, her expression one of pure, unadulterated fury. Her eyes met Ron's for a second, and in them he saw not fear, but a frustrated challenge. Do something, her gaze seemed to say. Lockhart struck a dramatic pose. Stand back, everyone. A simple, powerful cleansing charm should suffice. Extergio maxima. He swished his wand in a ridiculously complex spiral. A jet of silver light shot from its tip, not towards the corrupted tables, but straight up at the enchanted ceiling. The purple clouds roiled, and with a sound like cracking thunder, a torrent of the same black sludge rained down, drenching a dozen screaming Ravenclaws and extinguishing the floating candles, plunging the great hall into a murky twilight. The chaos tripled. Lockhart, now splattered with the black ooze, looked utterly bewildered. A temporary setback. The contamination is more tenacious than I anticipated. But Ron wasn't watching him anymore. His senses were on fire. The hissing wasn't just in the hall, it was coming from a direction. A source. It was pulling at him, a phantom string tied to his gut, leading him out of the great hall and down the corridor. He didn't know why, but he knew, with a certainty that defied his empty memory, that the heart of the problem wasn't here. It was somewhere else. He started walking, then broke into a run, ignoring Lockhart's confused shout of "Ronald, where are you going?" "I require assistance with this tactical atmospheric reassessment." He skidded around a corner, following the sound. It was louder here, a sibilant symphony of whispers coming from the very stones. He ran past a suit of armor, which rattled and shook as if trying to escape its own plating. He knew where he was going. The knowledge was there, buried under layers of magical fog, a primal instinct. He found himself outside the second-floor girls' bathroom. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. He didn't know how he knew its name, he just did. The door was vibrating slightly, and the hissing from within was a palpable, malevolent force. The black ooze was seeping from under the door, a sluggish, dark tide. He pushed the door open. The room was a scene of magical pandemonium. Water, black as pitch, gushed from every tap, flooding the floor. The mirrors were cracked, the glass showing distorted, writhing reflections. The central pillar of sinks, the one with the tiny serpent carved on a faucet, was the epicenter. A geyser of the noxious liquid was erupting from it, pulsing with a faint, sickly green light. In the air, a spectral, serpentine shape coiled and uncoiled, its form made of shadow and malevolent intent. It was a memory of the basilisk, an echo of its dark magic poisoning the very arteries of the castle. Ron's heart hammered against his ribs. This was real danger. The kind of danger a bumbling sidekick had no business facing. He should run. He should find a professor, find Dumbledore. Find the hero. But Lockhart had just made it rain sludge. Dumbledore could be anywhere. And this thing, this magical rot, was spreading. He raised his wand. It was his old wand, the one he'd broken at the start of the year. It was patched together with spellotape, a sad, pathetic-looking thing. Lockhart had offered to buy him a new one. A hero's apprentice must have the finest equipment, for appearance's sake. But Ron had refused, for reasons he couldn't articulate. Holding this wand just felt right. The spectral snake turned its shadowy head towards him. It had no eyes, but he felt its gaze, a wave of cold dread and ancient hatred. It hissed, and the sound wasn't just in his ears anymore. It was inside his head. Get out, flesh, kill. A flash of memory, sharp and blinding, seared through his mind. Asterisk cold, wet stone under his hands. The sound of a girl sobbing. A glint of silver, a sword. The stench of death. A voice, high and cold, echoing in a vast, dark space. And a pair of enormous, yellow, reptilian eyes, asterisk. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching his head. The pain was immense, a spike being driven through his skull. But through the pain came something else, a surge of defiance. A ghost of the boy he used to be. The boy who had walked into that darkness willingly. The spectral serpent lunged. Ron didn't think. He reacted. His wand arm came up, the broken stick feeling as steady and true as a limb. A spell came to his lips, unbidden, a word he hadn't known he remembered. It wasn't fancy or powerful. It was simple. Final. Asterisk finite incantatum, asterisk he roared, his voice cracking with the strain. A blast of pure, white light, shockingly powerful, erupted from the tip of his spell-taped wand. It wasn't the silvery flash of Lockhart's spells, it was solid, determined, and utterly defiant. It struck the shadowy serpent dead center. There was no explosion. Instead, the hissing rose to an unbearable shriek that tore at the very air. The spectral form convulsed, flickering violently like a dying flame. The black water gushing from the sinks faltered, the pressure dropping. The dark echo wavered, stretched, and then, with a final, aggrieved sigh, it dissolved into nothingness. Silence. The geyser from the central sink sputtered and died. The gushing tap slowed to a trickle, the water slowly, miraculously, running clear again. The oppressive cold in the room lifted, replaced by the damp chill of a flooded bathroom. Ron stood panting, his arm trembling. His head throbbed, a dull ache where the memory had pierced him. He stared at the sinks, at the now clear water pooling on the floor. He had done that. Not Lockhart. Not Harry Potter. He had done that. The feeling was dizzying, a strange mix of terror and exhilarating competence. Astonishing. Ron spun around. Gilderoy Lockhart stood in the doorway, his lilac robe still stained with sludge, a look of utter amazement on his face. He quickly rearranged it into a condescendingly proud smile. My boy, simply astonishing, he boomed, striding into the room and splashing through the puddles. My long-range extergio spell was, of course, a feint. A strategic maneuver designed to agitate the core magical disturbance and draw its essence to one place. I was tracking it, you see, and you led me right to it. Your simple, yet spirited, little counter-jinx was the perfect catalyst to trigger the second stage of my containment charm. Teamwork, Ronald. That's what saved the day. He clapped Ron on the shoulder, a heavy, proprietary gesture that made Ron's skin crawl. The exhilarating feeling vanished, replaced by a familiar, sinking sense of worthlessness. Of course. It was Lockhart's plan all along. He was just the clumsy tool, the final, insignificant step in a grand, heroic design. He had done nothing. It was all a fluke. Come, Lockhart said, already turning to leave, his mind on the press and the accolades. We must inform the headmaster that the crisis has been averted. I'll be sure to mention your enthusiastic participation. You're learning, my boy. You're learning. He swept out, leaving Ron alone in the dripping, silent bathroom. The sludge in the great hall would be receding. The castle would be settling. The hero had won. Ron looked down at his broken wand, then at his shaking hands. Lockhart's words echoed in his ears, perfectly logical, perfectly plausible to a boy with no memory. And yet, the feeling he'd had. The instinct that had guided him. The raw power that had surged from his wand. The searing flash of memory, the sword, the sobbing, the yellow eyes. That felt more real than any of Lockhart's polished stories. It felt like his. He trudged out of the bathroom, his boots squelching on the stone. He felt hollowed out, more confused than ever. Was he a hero's apprentice, or just a fool? A plucky sidekick, or a pawn? He was halfway down the corridor when a voice stopped him. That was you. He turned. Hermione Granger was standing there, her school bag clutched in her hands, her brow furrowed with an intense seriousness that seemed to drill right through him. She had ignored the departing, credit-stealing Lockhart completely. Her focus was entirely on Ron. The spell in the Great Hall, that was just him being an idiot, she said, her voice low and urgent. But in there? In the bathroom? That was you. I saw the light from the doorway. That wasn't his magic. Ron just stared at her, unsure what to say. He opened his mouth, but only a confused croak came out. Hermione took a step closer, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering belief that startled him. He's lying, Ron, she whispered, and the words landed with the force of a physical blow. He's lying about everything. You just don't remember it. She paused, her gaze searching his. But you're starting to, aren't you? #### Chapter 3, Echoes in Rowan and Stone. The Great Hall buzzed with a renewed, almost frantic energy the next morning. Yesterday's panic, the violent rattling of armor, the spectral chill that had sent first years screaming from the charms corridor, had been neatly repackaged overnight into another chapter of the Gilderoy Lockhart legend. According to the Daily Prophet, which Lockhart had arranged to have delivered by the dozen, he had single-handedly soothed the tormented echoes of Hogwarts, a feat of unparalleled magical sensitivity. Ron poked at a sausage on his plate, his appetite gone. He could still feel the phantom thrum of his own magic, the way it had leaped from his fingertips to contain the swirling vortex of dust and malice. He remembered the instinctive twist of his wrist, the nonsense word that had felt more right than his own name, and the sudden, silent obedience of the chaos. Then, Lockhart had swept in, wand aloft, declaring the danger past. Remarkable, wasn't it, Ron? Lockhart boomed, clapping a hand on Ron's shoulder from his seat at the head table. The sudden contact made Ron flinch. Saw the whole thing, of course. You created a magnificent diversionary disturbance, my boy. Gave me the perfect opening to deploy the pacifying aura. Quick thinking. A few Gryffindors nearby applauded. Ron felt his face burn, a hot, prickling shame that he couldn't place. He hadn't created a diversion. He had stopped it. Hadn't he? The memory was already fuzzy around the edges, overwritten by the thunderous certainty of Lockhart's voice. He caught Hermione's eye from across the table. She wasn't eating either. Her expression was tight, her brow furrowed in a way that Ron was beginning to recognize as her default state whenever Lockhart spoke. She gave a minute shake of her head, a silent command he couldn't interpret but felt compelled to obey. When the meal ended, she was at his side before he'd even pushed his chair back. The library, she whispered, her voice urgent. 3rd floor, arithmancy section. No one ever goes there. Ron followed her without a word, the weight of the school's collective admiration for Lockhart feeling like a physical pressure on his back. He felt like a fraud, but he wasn't even sure what he was being fraudulent about. The arithmancy section was just as Hermione had promised, a dusty, forgotten corner smelling of aging parchment and solitude. She led him to a corral tucked behind a towering shelf of numerical charts and pulled out a small, worn satchel. From it, she produced not textbooks, but a stack of slim, glossy volumes, each bearing a smirking, moving portrait of Gilderoy Lockhart on the cover. Asterisk Voyages with Vampires. Gaddying with Ghouls. Year with the Yeti asterisk. I've been reading, she said, her tone grim. She opened Break with a banshee to a marked page. Listen to this. The band in Banshee's final, soul-splitting shriek was no match for my patented subduing simper. I simply smiled, and its larynx collapsed from sheer performance anxiety. Ron blinked. He smiled a monster to death? It's utter nonsense, Hermione snapped, slamming the book shut. There's no such thing as a subduing simper. And that's not the point. The point is the details. Or the lack thereof. In every single one of these books, he's conveniently alone when he performs his greatest feats. The one witness is always a beautiful witch who is too overcome with gratitude to provide a coherent account, or a villager who only saw the blinding flash of his magnificent spellwork. She started pacing, her feet making soft, agitated sounds on the stone floor. It's a pattern, Ron. Vague descriptions, no verifiable witnesses, and an absolute refusal to perform any of the complex spells he describes. Remember the Cornish pixies? He couldn't even handle them. He just froze. Ron's head throbbed. He remembered the pixies. A chaotic blur of blue, a shattered chandelier, and Neville Longbottom dangling from the ceiling by his ears. He also remembered a flicker of profound disappointment, a feeling that the man in the turquoise robes wasn't who he was supposed to be. But the chamber, Ron began, his voice weak. Everyone says he did it. He saved Ginny. He saved me. The words tasted like ash. Does his story make sense to you? Hermione pressed, her eyes boring into his. He told the whole school he faced down a 60-foot basilisk, a creature whose direct gaze means instant death. He claims he used a complex series of blinding charms and a powerful severing curse he learned from a Tibetan warlock. I've looked it up. The warlock doesn't exist, and those charms wouldn't work. A basilisk's gaze is magical. You can't just block its line of sight with a simple lumos maxima. She was talking quickly now, the words tumbling out in a rush of intellectual fury. And then there's the parcel tongue. The door to the chamber only opens to a parcel mouth. Lockhart can't speak it. When I asked him how he got in, he just winked and said, "A true hero finds a way." That's not an answer, Ron, it's an evasion. Parcel tongue. The word snagged in his mind. As Hermione said it, a sound echoed in the hollows of his memory, faint but sharp, a dry, sibilant hissing. It wasn't the sound of a snake from a book, but a real, guttural whisper that seemed to slither down his spine. He felt a sudden, inexplicable terror, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the dusty library. Come to me, let me rip you, let me tear you. Ron? Are you all right? Hermione's voice cut through the chilling echo. He looked up, his face pale. A cold sweat had broken out on his forehead. I heard something. Just then. A hissing. Hermione's eyes widened, a flicker of fear replaced by intense concentration. What did you hear? I don't know. Words, I think. But not in English. He shook his head, trying to clear the lingering dread. It's nothing. Probably just my head. But Hermione wasn't letting it go. She looked at him, truly looked at him, not as Lockhart's bumbling apprentice, but as her friend. Your injuries, she said suddenly. When you woke up in the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey said you had a few scrapes and a nasty concussion from the falling rocks. But were there any other marks? Anything unusual? Ron frowned, trying to remember the sterile white room, the starchy sheets. He instinctively rubbed his right forearm. There was a faint itch there sometimes, a ghost of a pain he'd dismissed as part of his recovery. He pushed up the sleeve of his robe. Just below his elbow, pale against his freckled skin, was a small, perfectly round scar. It was puckered and shiny, the kind of mark left by a deep puncture wound. Hermione gasped, gently taking his arm to examine it. That's not from a rock, Ron. What is it? I don't know, he admitted. A wave of dizziness washed over him as he stared at the scar. A flash of memory, sharp and agonizing, pierced through the fog. Blinding pain in his arm. The taste of blood and poison. A brilliant, shimmering tear falling through the air, landing on the wound with a sizzle of golden light. He stumbled back, leaning against the bookshelf for support. A tear, he whispered, his voice hoarse. And a song, like a bird. Hermione stared at him, her mind working furiously. A phoenix, she breathed, her expression a mixture of awe and horror. Phoenix tears have immense healing powers. They're the only known cure for basilisk venom. The two of them stood in silence, the implication of her words hanging in the dusty air between them. If he had been poisoned by basilisk venom, it meant he had been close enough to be bitten. It meant he had fought it. It meant Lockhart's story, of Ron being knocked unconscious by falling rocks at the very beginning, was a lie. We need proof, Hermione said, her voice steely with resolve. Something undeniable. Something he can't explain away with a charming smile. She began to pace again, her brain clearly firing on all cylinders. His wand is new. I saw it in flourish and blots. A fancy eagle feather core. But what happened to his old one? And more importantly, what happened to yours? Ron's heart gave a painful lurch. His wand. It was the first thing he'd asked for when he woke up, and Lockhart had cheerfully presented him with a new, unfamiliar stick of willow. He'd said Ron's had been tragically crushed in the rockfall. A memory, clearer this time, surfaced. He was standing in a dark, damp tunnel. He was holding his wand, the familiar, comfortable weight of rowan and unicorn hair. It felt warm in his hand, loyal. But there was something wrong with it. It was broken. Held together with a thick, clumsy wrapping of spellotape. It was broken, Ron said aloud, the words surprising him. Before we went into the chamber. It was broken. How? Hermione prompted, her voice gentle. I don't remember. A car, maybe? Something about a tree. The details were slippery, refusing to come into focus. But the image of the damaged wand was crystal clear. A wand that's been broken and repaired with spellotape is unreliable, Ron. It's dangerous. It can backfire, Hermione explained, her eyes alight with a terrible theory. Lockhart said he performed a memory charm on the basilisk. You can't obliviate a snake, Ron said, the words coming from a place of deep, instinctual knowledge he didn't know he possessed. Exactly. Hermione exclaimed, grabbing his unscarred arm. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But what if he wasn't trying to charm the basilisk? What if he was trying to charm you? The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The broken wand. The backfiring spell. His own memory loss. He wiped my memory, Ron whispered. The dread from before returned, colder and more personal this time. He took my memory. And Harry's, Hermione added grimly. Harry doesn't remember anything either. Lockhart claims he heroically shielded you both from a cave-in, but what if he just wiped you both and invented the whole story? We need that wand, Ron. Your old wand. If the charm backfired, it would have hit him, not you. But if he used your broken wand, the magic could have gone wild. It could have hit you, Harry, maybe even him, just in a different way. It's the key. He wouldn't have just thrown it away. It's evidence. They both knew where it would be. Lockhart was a narcissist, but he wasn't stupid enough to leave proof of his fraud lying around. He would keep it somewhere he thought was safe. Somewhere he could control. His office. Getting into a professor's office after hours was a serious offense, but the thought of expulsion barely registered. This was bigger than school rules. This was about his life, his identity. This was about the truth. They waited until long after the last prefect had completed their rounds, the castle settling into a deep, moonlit silence. With Hermione's whispered Alohomora and Ron's uncanny, instinctual knowledge of which floorboard to avoid, they found themselves standing outside the door to the Defense Against the Dark Arts office. A large, garish portrait of Lockhart, this one painting its own fingernails, hung on the door. He'll see us, Ron hissed. He's too busy admiring himself, Hermione whispered back, and with another flick of her wand, the lock clicked open. The room was even more insufferable than Ron remembered. Stacks of his own portrait covered every surface, some winking, others preening. The air was thick with the cloying scent of whatever potion he used on his hair. Piles of fan mail were tied with lilac ribbons on his desk, next to a half-finished manuscript for his next book, tentatively titled, The Serpent's Scourge, How I Saved Hogwarts. Look for anything out of place, Hermione murmured, starting to search the bookshelves. Ron, however, felt a strange pull. It was the same instinct that had guided him in the corridor, a quiet hum of magic that drew him toward a heavy, ornate oak chest at the foot of Lockhart's four-poster bed. It was sealed with a large, golden lock. Hermione, he called softly. She came over, her wand at the ready. It'll be magically sealed. Let me try, Ron said, a strange confidence settling over him. He knelt, placing his hands on the lock. He didn't know a spell, but he felt a certain sympathy with the mechanism. He felt the faint magical current protecting it, the simple, looping charm Lockhart had used. It was like a poorly tied knot. Ron closed his eyes and simply pulled at the thread. With a dull thud, the lock sprang open. Hermione stared, her mouth agape. How did you do that? I don't know, Ron said, and it was the honest truth. He just did. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled amongst velvet cushions, were Lockhart's most precious treasures, a collection of spare toupees, a solid gold order of Merlin, first class, that Ron was fairly sure was a fake, and a bottle of Ogden's old fire whiskey. But tucked in the corner, almost as an afterthought, was a short, splintered length of wood, crudely bound with peeling spellotape. His wand. Ron reached for it, his fingers trembling. The moment his skin touched the familiar rowan wood, a jolt, white-hot and blinding, shot up his arm. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and light. A flash of brilliant blue light erupting from the wrong end of his wand. A high-pitched, terrified scream, Lockhart's scream. The deafening crack of stone splintering and shattering. The gut-wrenching sensation of falling, the air thick with dust and the smell of ozone. A face looming in the dark, pale and terrified, with a fresh gash on its forehead. Harry. Harry was saying his name asterisk. Ron gasped and fell back, dropping the wand. It clattered onto the stone floor, the sound echoing in the silent office. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind a searing headache and the undeniable, earth-shattering truth. Lockhart hadn't tried to save them. He had tried to erase them. And the spell, cast with Ron's own broken wand, had brought the ceiling down. Ron. Hermione knelt beside him, her face etched with concern. What did you see? He did it, Ron choked out, his voice raw with a mixture of fury and violation. He used my wand on us. The roof caved in. They had it. They had the proof. The broken wand lay on the floor, a silent testament to Lockhart's treachery. But as Ron pushed himself up, his eyes still swimming from the force of the memory, a sudden, unnatural cold swept through the room. It was the same chill from the corridor, but stronger now, more menacing. It didn't come from the door or the window. It seemed to bleed from the very stones of the castle. And with the cold came a whisper, no longer a faint echo in his mind, but a tangible, sibilant breath that curled around them in the dark. So hungry, so long. The voice wasn't a memory anymore. It was here. And it was awake. Chapter 4. The splintered house of his wand, held together by a pathetic length of spellotape, felt heavier than a goblin-forged sword. It was the key, the jagged piece that refused to fit into the neat, heroic puzzle Gilderoy Lockhart had constructed. Ron sat on his hospital bed, turning the damaged U over and over in his hands while Hermione stood by the window, her arms crossed, her expression a thunderous mixture of impatience and concern. He told everyone it was damaged during the final duel with the basilisk, she said, her voice tight. A testament to the ferocity of the battle. He even tried to get it mounted in a display case for the trophy room. Ron flinched. Another flash, sharp and painful as a splinter under a nail, had struck him in the corridor just moments before. Not a full memory, but a sensation, the bone-jarring kick of a spell backfiring, the smell of ozone, and a high-pitched, terrified scream that sounded unnervingly like Lockhart's. It doesn't feel right, Hermione, he mumbled, tracing the deep score marks in the wood. When I hold it, it feels wrong. Like it was used for something shameful. Because it was, Ron, she insisted, stepping closer. Her voice softened. Lockhart is a fraud. He didn't fight anything. He tried to erase your and Harry's memories to steal the story for himself. Your wand backfired and hit him instead. That's why his memory is gone for good. But yours is just buried. He wanted to believe her. Every instinct screamed that she was right. But the world, the entire, adoring wizarding world, said otherwise. The Daily Prophet headlines, the grateful letters from parents, the way younger students pointed at him in the corridors, whispering about the hero's plucky apprentice. It was a tide of adulation so strong it threatened to drown his fragile, emerging sense of self. "We have to tell Dumbledore," Hermione pressed. "Show him the wand. Tell him what you're starting to remember." Ron nodded, his resolve hardening. He clutched the broken wand and slid off the bed. His legs felt steadier than they had in days. For the first time, he wasn't just a confused boy being led by the hand, he was a participant, an investigator seeking his own truth. "All right. Let's go." As they stepped out of the hospital wing, a peculiar chill snaked through the corridor, colder than the usual castle drafts. It wasn't the damp cold of the dungeons, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to leach the very warmth from the stone. The cheerful afternoon light streaming through the high window seemed to dim, the colors washing out to a dreary gray. "What was that?" Ron asked, rubbing his arms. Hermione frowned, her eyes darting around. "I don't know. A sudden change in pressure, maybe?" But it wasn't just the cold. A low, sibilant whisper echoed from the walls, so faint it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't the Parseltongue he'd heard in his fragmented nightmares, the language of snakes. This was different. It sounded like 1,000 secrets being told at once, a venomous murmur that promised despair. They hurried their pace, the unsettling feeling growing with every step. As they rounded the corner towards the grand staircase, the whispers grew louder, and they could hear a rising clamor from below. The babble of hundreds of voices, usually a comforting hum from the great hall, had twisted into a discordant symphony of fear. They broke into a run, clattering down the moving stairs, nearly colliding with a terrified Hufflepuff first year who was scrambling upwards, his face pale and tear-streaked. "What's going on?" Hermione demanded, steadying the boy. "In the hall," he squeaked. "The shadows, they're moving. And the whispering." They didn't wait for more. Pushing through a small crowd of panicked students bottlenecked at the entrance, they burst into the great hall. The scene was one of surreal chaos. The enchanted ceiling, which should have been a perfect, cloudless blue, was a roiling vortex of bruised purple and black. The floating candles flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed and coiled on the stone floor like living things. The cold was intense now, frosting the edges of the window panes and raising goosebumps on every arm. But the worst part was the entity taking shape in the center of the room. It was a formless mass of oily black smoke, churning and rising from the flagstones. It had no definite shape, yet it suggested a monstrous, serpentine form, a colossal snake made of pure shadow and dread. As it coalesced, the whispering intensified, weaving through the hall, a chorus of hopelessness that made Ron's teeth ache and his stomach clench. It wasn't alive, not in the way the basilisk had been. It felt like a memory-given form, a stain of dark magic that had seeped from the chamber below and was now poisoning the heart of the castle. Students were screaming, backing away, pressing themselves against the walls. Professors McGonagall and Flitwick were trying to erect a protective barrier, their spells fizzling out a few feet from the shadowy mass, absorbed without effect. And then, with a grand flourish, the doors to the great hall were thrown open. "Have no fear. Lockhart is here." Gilderoy Lockhart strode into the room, his periwinkle robes immaculate, his golden hair catching the dim, flickering light. He held a new, polished cherry wand aloft, and his face was set in a determined, photogenic smile. It was the smile of a man who saw not a terrifying magical threat, but a magnificent photo opportunity. "A residual phantasm," he declared, his voice booming artificially. "Nasty bit of business, but nothing a wizard of my caliber can't handle. Stand back, everyone. Give a master room to work." He swaggered towards the shadow serpent, which pulsed and hissed in response to his approach. He struck a dramatic pose, wand pointed like a fencing foil. Pescapixie pesternemy, he cried. A pathetic puff of green smoke shot from his wand and dissipated harmlessly against the dark mass. The shadow thing seemed to swell, its whispers growing louder and more menacing. Several younger students whimpered and covered their ears. A stubborn one, I see. Lockhart announced, his smile faltering slightly. Requires a more robust approach. Densajo. The jet of light from his wand missed the shadow entirely, ricocheted off a suit of armor, and struck a platter of treacle tarts on the Gryffindor table, causing them to grow enormous, sticky teeth. Ron stared, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and dawning horror. This was the hero who had saved him? This preening, incompetent fool? He's making it worse, Hermione whispered urgently, her hand gripping Ron's arm. The entity is feeding on the fear. His flashy, useless spells are just agitating it. Lockhart, now sweating, tried another spell. Ricta Sempra, the tickling charm, a first-year staple, vanished into the shadow with no effect whatsoever. The serpentine form lunged, not with fangs, but with tendrils of pure cold and despair. Lockhart shrieked and stumbled backward, tripping over his own robes and landing in a heap on the floor. The hero of the wizarding world was cowering. And in that moment, as Ron watched the fraudulent savior scrabble away from the danger he was supposed to vanquish, the final wall in his mind didn't just crack. It shattered. He was in the dark, the air thick with the stench of damp stone and something ancient and reptilian. Water lapped at his ankles. Harry was further ahead, his silhouette vanishing around a bend. You wait here, Ron, Lockhart's voice, trembling but trying for authority. I'll just go on ahead. A moment of silence. Then, a sudden movement. Ron turned just in time to see Lockhart pointing a wand, his wand, the broken one, directly at him. The memory charm, Lockhart said, his bravado gone, replaced by a desperate, rat-like cunning. I'm sorry, boys. But I can't have you remembering. I'll have to take the story back to the school, tell them you both went mad at the sight of her mangled body, Rage, pure and hot, surged through Ron. Rage for Harry, walking into a trap. Rage for Ginny, being used as a pawn in this coward's pathetic story. He lunged. But Lockhart was faster. Obliviate. The world exploded in a flash of blinding green-white light, erupting not from the tip of the wand, but from its fractured middle. The force of the backfiring spell threw Ron backward, slamming him into the tunnel wall. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Lockhart, his eyes wide with vacant surprise as the full force of the charm hit him, wiping his own mind clean. Ron gasped, stumbling forward. The great hall swam back into focus, the memory not a flash this time, but a fully formed, concrete certainty. It was true. All of it. Hermione had been right. He wasn't an apprentice. He was a victim. The shadow serpent coiled, its form growing more distinct, drawing power from the terror that now saturated the hall. It was an echo of the basilisk, a nightmare given life by the residue of Tom Riddle's soul magic. It had no body to destroy, no eyes to avoid. It was a creature of pure emotion. He remembered something else, a snatch of conversation from a defense against the dark arts lesson, a real one, taught by Professor Quirrell, of all people, before he'd started wearing that ridiculous turban. Some of the darkest magical remnants are not curses, but emotional imprints. They cannot be fought with force, but with their antithesis. The antithesis of fear. The antithesis of despair. Courage. Hope. Light. Hermione, Ron said, his voice surprisingly steady. It's not real. Not properly. It's a shadow. It's feeding on the panic. She looked at him, her eyes wide. She saw the change in him, the fog of confusion replaced by a sharp, focused clarity. What are you going to do? He didn't answer. He just squeezed her arm and started walking forward, past the petrified students, past the overwhelmed professors, and past the whimpering heap that was Gilderoy Lockhart. He ignored the whispers, the chilling cold, and the writhing darkness ahead. He held his own wand, the broken, spell-taped you, in a firm grip. It felt right in his hand now. It was a part of him, its flaws a testament to the truth. "Mr. Weasley, get back!" Professor McGonagall shouted, her voice strained. Ron ignored her, too. He stopped a dozen feet from the spectral horror. It towered over him, a vortex of shadow that promised oblivion. He could feel its despair washing over him, whispering of his own insecurities. The sixth son. Never the best. Always in the shadow of his brothers, of his famous best friend. The sidekick. The afterthought. For a moment, he faltered. The old voice, the one that had lived in the back of his mind his whole life, agreed with the whispers. Then he thought of facing a troll in a girl's bathroom to save a friend he'd only just made. He thought of sacrificing himself on a giant chessboard so his friends could go on. He thought of stealing a flying car to rescue a friend from a prison. He thought of walking willingly into a forest full of giant, man-eating spiders because that same friend needed him. These weren't memories he could see clearly yet, but he could feel them. They were foundational stones of his character, buried but not gone. He wasn't Harry Potter, the boy who lived. He was Ron Weasley. And that was enough. He raised his wand. He didn't think of a complex incantation or a powerful dueling spell. He thought of the simplest, most fundamental piece of magic he knew. He thought of light. Not just a spark to read by, but a brilliant, defiant beacon against the encroaching dark. He poured all of his rediscovered self, all his loyalty, all his stubborn courage, into the words. Lumos Maxima, The spell didn't just erupt from the tip of his wand. It erupted from the spellotape, from the cracks in the U, from his very hand. It wasn't the pale white light of a normal charm. It was a sphere of pure, golden sunlight, warm and brilliant and utterly fearless. It expanded rapidly, a miniature sun born in the heart of the great hall. When the light hit the shadow serpent, the creature didn't explode. It dissolved. The thousand whispering voices rose into a single, agonized shriek as the light burned through the darkness, unraveling the threads of fear and despair that gave it form. The oily smoke evaporated like mist in the morning sun, leaving nothing behind. The golden light held for a moment longer, washing over every student, chasing away the chill and filling the hall with a profound sense of peace and warmth. Then, it gently faded, leaving the enchanted ceiling a clear, calm blue and the candles burning steadily once more. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Every single eye in the great hall was fixed on Ron Weasley. Slowly, shakily, Gilderoy Lockhart got to his feet, dusting off his robes. He plastered on his widest, most dazzling smile, though his eyes were wide with panic. "Excellent assistance, Weasley," he boomed, striding forward to clap Ron on the shoulder. "A fine diversionary tactic. Just as I taught you. Together, we have once again." "No," Ron said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. He turned to face the fraud, his expression hard. "We did nothing together." He held up his broken wand. "You did this. You tried to erase my memory. And Harry's. Down in the chamber, because you're a coward. You've never done a single heroic thing in your life." Lockhart's smile vanished, replaced by a ghastly, stretched-out parody. "Now, see here, my boy. A touch of trauma-induced delusion is quite common. You tried to leave my sister down there to die," Ron continued, his voice rising with righteous fury. "You wanted to leave us and tell everyone we'd gone mad so you could claim you'd killed the basilisk. You pointed my wand at me and shouted obliviate. The gasps from the students and staff were audible. Lockhart paled dramatically, his eyes darting towards the exits. From the staff table, a calm voice spoke. "I believe every word Mr. Weasley says." Albus Dumbledore rose to his feet, his blue eyes no longer twinkling, but fixed on Lockhart with an expression of profound disappointment. Professor McGonagall was already moving, her face a mask of cold fury, her wand held at a low, ready angle. "Gilderoy," Dumbledore said, his voice echoing with quiet authority. "Your time at Hogwarts has come to an end. Professor McGonagall will escort you from the grounds." Your celebrity awaits you. Lockhart sputtered, looking from Dumbledore's implacable face to McGonagall's wrathful one. With a pathetic whimper, he turned and allowed himself to be led away, his grand heroic exit reduced to a shamed shuffle. The great hall remained silent for another long moment before a single person began to clap. It was Ginny, her face shining with pride for her brother. Then Hermione joined in, her applause fierce and loud. Soon, the entire Gryffindor table was on its feet, followed by the Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws, and even a few grudging Slytherins. The roar of applause was deafening, a wave of genuine gratitude and awe that was nothing like the manufactured adoration that had followed Lockhart. Ron stood in the middle of it all, his face burning, overwhelmed but whole. He wasn't a sidekick. He wasn't an apprentice. He was the boy who had faced down a nightmare with a broken wand and a simple spell, and won. Later, after the commotion had died down and he'd been checked over once more by a flustered but proud Madame Pomfrey, Ron found himself walking not towards Gryffindor Tower, but back towards the hospital wing. His own memories were flooding back, messy and incomplete, but they were his. There was one person, however, whose mind was still a blank canvas. He pushed open the heavy oak door. The ward was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. In the furthest bed, a boy with untidy black hair and round glasses was sitting up, staring blankly at the coverlet. Ron took a deep breath, the wood of his broken wand feeling warm and familiar in his hand. He stepped inside. "Harry?"